The dust has finally settled. The Sega Genesis Mini is out in the wild and people are playing it.
We've taken a look at the retail release and we've looked at the review release. What do we think?
Hot take! Okay, Shane, we had a review.
Yes, we did.
We had a review up on Rerez proper of the Genesis Mini.
Yes, we did.
And I'm not seeing it now when I go onto the Rerez YouTube page.
It was pulled down.
It was pulled down, but why?
So, I want everyone to understand that when we review something at Rerez, we don't talk to other people while we're reviewing it. The only company we speak to is the company that sent us a product to review because they need to let us know about things that haven't been released publicly yet, whether it be how to operate the hardware or the software, whatever it may be. Now, here's what happened. After I did my review, I found the product to be very, very bad. The Sega Genesis had a whole bunch of problems with it. The Sega Genesis Mini had a whole bunch of problems with it.
We'll just call it the Mini from here on out.
Yeah, the Mini had problems, and these problems were very noticeable to me, and I exchanged lots of messages with Sega to find out exactly what was going on. Perhaps we had a broken version. Maybe there was something wrong specifically with ours, and the retail release was going to be different. So I pulled the review down just because I didn't want to basically make anyone think that the product was worse than it was or better than it could be based off of what we saw.
Okay, so in a nutshell though, because we don't have the luxury of clicking on that review right now, what were some of your pros and cons in that video?
Pros: big library, bigger than you got with the NES Classic or the SNES Classic.
42 games.
So a lot of great stuff. There's some games in there that are really hard to come by, a couple of translations that are really cool. I like the box, I like the physical design of the system. I think the controller is so close to the original Sega Genesis 3 button that you likely wouldn't know if you were just holding it that there was any difference between the two controllers. Honestly, this right here is well-designed look. Everything about this is really cool.
The attention to detail in particular with the physical item itself, especially the console having all the little switches and the fact that you can open this up and connect a Sega CD to it, and it's just as hard to do.
Break it open.
Yeah, just as hard to do as there's a little Sega CD input there.
Yeah. Doesn't functionally work.
Yeah, well,
we'll talk about that a little bit later. But anyway, that was my overall view on this. The problem was I started noticing immediately a double input problem. So what it was whenever you were pushing left or right or up or down on the D-pad, it would actually just once in a while just double that input, and it would cause a problem. This was most noticeable on the main menu. I also noticed it while playing a couple games as well, like Columns and a few other games. The thing was, a lot of people started to say, well, Columns is like that originally on the real Sega Genesis. The game is functionally broken all the way back there. So I was like, okay, let's go back and play the original Columns on the original Sega Genesis hardware. And to my surprise, that problem is in the original game. There is a double input problem in that game, meaning never ever play the original Columns.
So when we hear like a double input, people might not know exactly how that feels in Columns. It's more like in Columns, if you press the button left or right and you don't release the button very quickly, then you'll move your little 3 columns will move over. So it's I don't think it's like registering that you're pressing the button twice, but it's very quickly going to, oh, you want to scroll right?
Yes.
Okay, let's make that happen super quick. So I think it feels more like a double input than an actual register of a double input.
So it's a problem in Columns. I must have played it for years and never noticed it, although I was using very different hardware and very different TVs. Maybe with more digital TVs, it's more noticeable. Whatever it may be, it is in the original game. So for that was a mistake. However, there is that double input problem on the main menu, and it may in fact be affecting other games as well. It's just so hard to tell because outside of Columns, not many other games have that left and right move except for Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine.
And we didn't really notice it with that either. So yeah, it's I think from our experiences, it's mainly in the main menu, like you said, scrolling through all the games, which can be frustrating when you want to select a game and you just shoot right past it. But I think it's also in the save menus system as well.
So if you actually push the reset button on the Sega Genesis Mini, it will bring up a list of things that you can do, an options menu basically, and even in there, the double input thing happens. modes, so it makes you think like it's happening in all the games as well too. So I started questioning the way all of these games performed. Now, that doesn't mean that the games are flawless. Without that, there are problems with certain games, like Monster World 4.
Right. So there's an issue with some games that have a horizontal pixel display of 256 pixels, I believe. Some games just they're like that. Monster World 4 is like that. Wonder Boy in Monster World and Mega Man as well.
Yes.
The trilogy that's on this console.
The Wily Wars.
The Wily Wars. That's right. So we saw Digital Foundry looked at this system as well, and their sort of fix for this, and I don't believe every TV can do this, but if you do notice some shimmering, it's possible that you can kind of scale the image on your television, and you might be able to have a bit of a workaround so that the shimmering is either gone or not as noticeable.
Yeah,
was what they had said, but still, it kind of, what if your TV can't do that? You know, or what, you know, it
sucks. Look, these games are playable. It's just this experience isn't exactly
it's
perfect.
not perfect. So like when we're talking about the negative, the negative side of this console, we're doing it as people that we just love, the original units and games and stuff, and we want them as pitch perfect as possible.
Yeah.
The things that we're saying do not destroy what this product is. In fact, like we said, we have a retail version as well as our review version, and we wanted to pick up the retail version to compare things.
Yep.
But I also wanted to pick it up just because I still think it's a great system, and I want it. And I played the review unit, and despite the flaws that you had noticed and that I noticed a bit as well, I was like, this is still a great product. 42 games. Most of which are emulated quite well.
Yes, I agree. So as far as we can tell from experiencing so this is the review unit, that's the retail.
And we looked at the physicality of it, and it's identical. And when we played them as well, we noticed that they're identical.
You still get the same D double input problem in the menu. The games still have the same pixel shimmering issue too.
Right.
So yeah, it's still there. Now, here is the problem that I had with that. I came into this expecting a perfect representation. Now, M2 is the company that did the emulation on this, and they're renowned for doing really great work. So what's confusing to me is that M2 was responsible for the Monster World collection that was released on the Xbox 360, where Monster World 4 Translated was on there, and the game didn't have pixel shimmering. It was perfect. So why was it that they were capable of doing it properly there, but not capable of doing it properly on the Genesis Mini? That's a problem I have. Mega Man Wily Wars, I never played the original Mega Man Wily Wars because I didn't have a Sega Channel TV to play it in North America. So any other version of the game I would have had would have been the European version or whatever, or even a hacked cartridge that had it ported on there. So I couldn't give you a one-to-one like explanation of if that game is good or not. It's bad. Mega Man Wily Wars is not a very good game. The version on NES are severely better in multiple ways.
Yeah, I appreciate it just for it being part of video game preservation and having a physical North American release.
Yes.
In a sense, like it's, of course, you don't have whatever the packaging and card and stuff. But we now, and it's the same with Monster World 4, we now have a physical sort of capsule of those titles, as well as other things like Tetris. You played Tetris. What was your opinion of Tetris?
This is the worst version of Tetris I've ever played, and I've played a lot of versions of Tetris. And I'm also going to state that I am not a bad person at Tetris. I can play Tetris fairly well, but wow, does it not work well on this system.
Again, I just wanted to point out, and a lot. It's not just you. A lot of people have problems with this version of Tetris. It's from all accounts, it's not all that great, but it's a time capsule. We now have this locked in sort of physical version of this Tetris, which was incredibly difficult to attain. Only a few copies had leaked out of this, and it was multiple thousands of dollars if you wanted to pick this up. But now people can historically go back and say, okay, this was what was going to come to the Mega Drive or to the Genesis way back in the day.
Yeah, I've literally played the Nintendo PlayStation. I have not played Tetris. Like, I can give you a one-to-one example of how the Nintendo PlayStation plays.
Right.
But when it comes to the Tetris version that was released on Genesis, I can't. One of the biggest problems with that version of Tetris is at the very top, the actual pieces get locked when they're coming down, and you really can't move them around or shake them around or anything because of the way the game is designed. It is a functionally bad version of Tetris. It is, in my opinion, the worst one that was ever released from a major publisher, and I think the ones you find on NES are better. So at this point, Mega Man is better on the NES, the Tetris is better on the NES, and now I'm starting to feel like those Monster World games and Monster Boy, the pixel shimmering, those are problems too. Yes, this is a physical release of these games, but they're just not very well done, or the original versions of those games are bad to begin with.
Yeah. So if you're looking for pitch perfect games on this device, yeah, those things could be a negative, but I see an audience that is not necessarily looking for like 100% accurate emulation. Yeah. They're still going to get a lot of fun out of this console. And I remember we went to a talk with Frank Cifaldi, who worked with Digital Eclipse, and they released the SNK 40th anniversary collection. Yes. And in his talk, he was like, you know what? A lot of these games aren't good. This game's bad. This game's terrible. But they're in this collection, and there's no other way to play these games. These games could be lost to time.
Yes.
And it's important that we have systems like this. Incredibly important.
And that is 100% correct.
And it's accessible to the public. And despite its flaws, I still think this is a really great little device.
Now, in Kid Chameleon, though it is subtle, there is a problem with the audio. We can't identify if it's in every single game, but it's missing a slight note here or there. Now, on top of that, GameSack and Digital Foundry had mentioned that audio lag issue that could be incorporated here. The game sounds the same to me. As far as we can tell, the review unit we got and the retail version we picked up are the exact same. There is no difference. They are the same hardware, the same software, everything's the same, flaws and all. There are a lot of good Genesis games on this collection, okay? You might not like Kid Chameleon all that much, but it still plays well. It's just the sound is a little bit off from what I could tell. Yeah. But you got Sonic 1, you have Sonic 2, you've got a lot of really awesome Genesis games that you can play on.
You got a lot of gems that I think people passed over, or they didn't really hear about because of whatever. You know, a bunch of games were being released in the 90s, and we had things like Beyond Oasis, which is on here, and Landstalker, which are both kind of sort of in the same vein as The Legend of Zelda, and a lot of people were probably like, well, I don't want to play something that looks like a Legend of Zelda ripoff, and maybe they miss those titles, but they're great, and you should be playing them. And
absolutely.
There's a bunch of other stuff too, like if you never really got into the Shinobi series, Shinobi 3's on here, and
Comic Zone runs great on here.
Comic Zone is always notoriously difficult to get emulated well.
In fact, if you ever played it on the At-Game systems, throw those At-Game systems out and get yourself this, because this is how Comic Zone's supposed to work.
Now, when you have 42 games and you have something that is so like epic as the Sega Genesis library was, you're going to be missing a lot of stuff.
Yes.
We got some great stuff on here, like some Konami titles that we were like, I don't know if Konami's going to let those loose into, the classic or the mini, I should say.
Yeah.
But they did. We got Castlevania Bloodlines, which is great, and we also got Contra Hardcore.
One of my favorite. Yeah.
It's probably a lot of people say it's the best Contra game ever. I have to play it more I've never beaten Contra Hardcore myself.
And you know what? I'm seeing all the comments. Look, I see you writing right now. It's Core, not Corpse. Let's not get into this.
Oh, no.
You call it the Army Corps, not the Army Corpse. When I was a kid, I called it Corpse too, but after a while, I discovered that it's called Core. So just before you write the comment, before you hit enter, it's Core. I know it's not spelled that way, but that's how you pronounce it.
Shane, maybe you might want to tackle this as well. If you're talking about how people want to correct the Core or Corpse thing, can we talk a little bit about the peripherals that came after the Genesis, shortly after there's a thing on Twitter where you're like, oh, well, and it was in the review too, I believe.
Yes, it was.
And we talked about it in Hot Takes where we wanted Sega CD, maybe a Sega CD title or two on the Classic. We thought or the Mini, it would fit quite well. Maybe some 32X integration. What happened?
A lot of people online were very upset because I had the audacity to say that the Sega CD games and 32X games deserve to be on the system. A lot of people were comparing that to saying, well, what about N64 games being on the SNES Classic? Okay, those are completely different things. The N64 is a standalone console. To play Nintendo 64 games, you need
You need a Nintendo 64.
To play Super Nintendo games, you need?
You could get the Virtual Console. No. You traditionally have
Okay. The 32X and the Sega CD, I know this is going to be controversial to people. They are not consoles. They are accessories or peripherals. They are additions to that one system. They are not individual consoles.
Yeah.
Here's how you know this. If you take a Sega CD game, or you take the Sega CD and you just put it there, and you put a disc in the drive and you turn it on, it won't turn on. It won't play the game because you need a Sega Genesis to be there.
What about the CDX, Shane?
The CDX.
I know, I'm just messing around.
But that's the thing. The CDX.
It also has the internals of a
the GVC, the JVC XI. All those systems are still Sega Genesis consoles that have the attachments internally. They are standalone systems that can play it. However, they are still Sega Genesis systems.
Shane, I would also like to say that I think that Sega knows that these peripherals were part of the legacy of the Genesis, because they did a thing that basically proves that they know that it's part of the they themselves are like, no, this is part of the Genesis Mini. Now, you know what sucks about this, Shane?
This is called the Tower of Power, by the way.
Yes.
Up here, just so if you don't know, we have a little mini cartridge of Sonic the Hedgehog.
Yes.
We have Sonic and Knuckles on here. For those of you that don't know, Sonic and Knuckles is a cartridge that opens up to put other cartridges on top, which you wouldn't call a console, would you? But that's basically what the 32X is, which is right there.
Well, that's not fair. That's much different.
It's a little bit different.
That's much different.
And then underneath there is the Sega CD,
the
which
Model
is the
1,
Model 1.
The Model 1 Sega CD, yeah. So these don't really do anything. It's cosmetic.
These are all plastic hollow pieces.
Yeah, they look great. There's a lot of attention to detail put on this. In fact, if you open up you showed me this. If you open up the Model 1 Sega CD, there's a little cardboard of the internals on the inside of it, right?
I think it was Spawn Wave that discovered that originally. I think he might have been just hearing something shake around, but yeah, they're in there. This is the thing, though. Sega themselves acknowledges that this is a part of the Sega Genesis.
This is part of it.
They're literally giving us plastic pieces to put on the Genesis, meaning that it's a part of the Sega Genesis.
Here's what's really kind of cruddy about this, though, is that this was produced in a short run just for some reviewers, and not every reviewer. Some reviewers are like, look, no, I didn't get that, and there's some big names out there that didn't get these. And it seems like it seems like buttering up reviewers more than anything else, because this is not accessible for I would love to go out and just be able to pick this up off the shelf.
I would like for this to be available in stores.
It should be. I feel like it should be.
Look, we're lucky to have gotten something like this, but I want to be honest with you folks here. What I would have been more interested in is having those games on the actual platform. I don't care as much for this as I think some people do.
We're talking about some of the negative aspects of the Mini itself.
Yeah.
Why not maybe take the money that you could have put into designing and creating the packaging and the mini consoles and the cardboard that goes in the Model 2 or the Model 1 Sega CD? Why not take that effort and put it into sewing up the emulation on some of those games?
As far as I can tell, having looked at these very, very closely, these are not 3D printed. These were produced with plastic molding.
And love.
Yeah, so that's expensive. Do you know how? I actually know this. Do you know how expensive a plastic mold is? It is not cheap. It can be thousands of dollars, $20,000, $30,000. You could have spent that money just putting some Sega CD games on here. And look, it's a complex thing. I think it's a really cute thing. They could have released that at retail. I hope they do. I really hope they do.
It completely baffles me that this isn't on shelves right now. But just even the presentation with the box and everything, it looks like it's ready just to be picked up when you pick up your Mini.
But if you look at the back of the box, it actually says not for resale. Which, by the way, things that come into Rerez, we don't sell. So it's not like I'm going to be making any money off of this. It's just here to look at.
I might just steal it from Shane, though.
So another problem that a lot of people have with the Sega Genesis is that, like we said, it comes with the 3-button. There are a lot of games on the system that could have made use of the 6-button. Let's forget about all of them and just talk about one.
Street Fighter 2 is extremely important, but you know what, Shane? We can default.
Comic Zone as well.
That's more important to me. Not more important to me, but that's important to say as well. Comic Zone, Eternal Champions is one of them as well.
For those who want to play that,
I don't think Eternal Champions needs to be on the mini console myself.
That would be another conversation we're about to have in a couple minutes too.
Okay.
Say that. But if you got the Retrobit controller, Retrobit sent these into us. Let me make this clear because we didn't actually review these very much in the review. Retrobit did an amazing job. These controllers are 6-button controllers that also have little shoulder buttons on the top.
That's right. Yeah, there was only one. There was only the mode button before. Yeah.
This, their Saturn controller that's USB. They work on the Genesis Mini. They actually do work, and they're fantastic.
They're really good.
There's a mode button at the bottom, and the mode button opens up the main menu, which you can't do on the 3-button controller. This is the controller that should have been included with the Genesis Mini. Absolutely. It is a fantastic, well-designed controller. I give it high marks, and if you're just looking to have a 6-button Genesis controller for USB, get this. It's really, really good.
Yeah, it's a shame, in fact, like thinking about the other releases of the Mini as well, because there's a version of the Mini that does come with the 6-button controller, right?
Yes,
I believe it's the Japan version. So it's weird messaging where it's like, oh no, we want to be classic. Well, I'm pretty sure they had the 3-button back then before they had the 6-button, so why them? I think it might be a deal that they had with Retrobit, but that's all hearsay.
Whatever it is.
Whatever.
It should have been in there. I don't care.
Yeah.
And speaking of things that should have been in there, you don't have every Sonic the Hedgehog game. I know for many of you out there, it's not going to be that big of a deal. I get it. Sega CD, bit more complex. But how come Sonic the Hedgehog 3 isn't in there? I don't want to hear that it has anything to do with music rights and Michael Jackson. I don't care. The fact is the game existed and we played it. It's an essential part of the trilogy of Sonic games.
If you bought the I think it's Sonic Classics collection on the PS3.
Yes.
Sonic and Knuckles and Sonic the Hedgehog 3 are on that disc.
Yes. Here's something that's important. I talked about there being a Sega Genesis collection that's available on the Switch. It's available on a bunch of other platforms.
Great collection.
Yeah. On the PC, at least, I have Sonic & Knuckles. It's on there. So why is it on there and not on here? Sonic & Knuckles with Sonic 3, by the way, for those of you that don't know, I think it knocks out Michael Jackson's music. If you ever played the game, the music isn't the same. Why not use that version? If you couldn't use that version, I'm going to be a super nerd here, why not use the version of Sonic the Hedgehog 3 that was released on CD for Windows 95 that actually replaced all the music with new music from Sega? Why not that? I know it's not officially the same version we had on the Genesis, but we have to have a version on the system. There's no Sonic 3D Blast.
Nope.
Understandable on that one. But like we're missing like a lot of Sonic games here, folks.
A lot of people, and we've been saying since day one when they're first announcing, 10 more titles are coming, and they were kind of doling those out. We're always saying, okay, Konami seems to be putting games on this thing. Rocket Knight Adventure is definitely going to be on this system, and that's a huge omission for really a lot of fans of the original console. We got one Shining Force game, and I feel like that does that whole catalog a disservice because
there's a lot of good ones.
There's a lot of good ones, right? And there's other games in the series that don't even play like Shining Force does. Like Shining in the Darkness is more of a traditional sort of dungeon crawling JRPG.
Yeah, this is opinionated, right?
Yeah.
For the first columns appears to be broken with its double input. How come the third columns game wasn't included, which by many accounts is one of the best games? When we're talking about other entries of games, there's only one Golden Axe, only one Street Fighter. Or not Street Fighter. We only want the one Street Fighter. Streets of Rage.
Streets of Rage 2, which I think that's fine.
It's fine. Rystar isn't on there, which is kind of a weird one.
Yeah,
but there's also really strange choices. Like, look, Virtua Fighter 2, the Sega Genesis version is bad. Like, it's a bad game. That should maybe if you had the 3D version on there. I know a lot of people talked about the arcade version not being on here because it's an arcade version of a game. Sure, but this version is just awful. If you compare it directly against Street Fighter, it's insulting how bad this version of the game is. It's unbelievable. And then we have Space Harrier 2. Space Harrier 2 was only ever released on the Genesis. As far as I'm aware, it was never released in arcades, but it is a terrible version of Space Harrier. The original version is so much better. And I get we can't have the arcade version, but there was a fantastic port made for the 32X of Space Harrier.
Oh, that's a different console though, Shane.
Oh yeah, is it? Jeez. You know what I'm talking about? We had home ports of these games and they were done very well, and for them not to be on this system is confusing to me. It really is. You know, Darius was a weird one for me too.
Yeah,
So
I got some stuff to say about this.
So Darius never came out on the Sega Genesis. So we got a version for the Sega Genesis for the first time ever on the system, which, by the way, that's really cool.
Yeah.
I think it's really neat. It also shows that Sega was willing to do a bunch of things outside of the core games released on the Genesis originally.
Right, yeah. So this version of Darius is also has kind of a weird, like some people, like someone had lovingly gone and reproduced Darius for the Genesis and kind of made their own ROM, just a fan.
Yeah.
And I guess this is very, very much like that version. So there, when this was first sort of showcased, people were like, well, what happened? Did M2 wind up talking to this person and getting the ROM? We still kind of don't know what happened there.
We don't.
But this, I would say that this is a decent version of Darius. The aspect ratio is, of course, 4:3.
We need to talk about that.
Well, here's the thing, Shane. I know you have gripes with this, but do you know how many versions of Darius were released in 4:3? A bunch.
Yeah.
A bunch. Turbo Graphics, well, I should say the PC Engine.
Sure.
PC Engine CD. There's a bunch of them, 4:3 versions.
And it's great, and I'm glad that this version's on here.
Yes.
What I'm not glad about is the fact that we now have widescreen televisions, and we could have had a more close approximation of the original arcade release.
Have a 4:3 release of this, and okay, yeah, maybe it's programmed to take into consideration a 4:3 mode, but what's the pain in making a 16:9?
Got the rights, you got the license.
Just have a thing. It's like, oh, you want to play it the other way? Here, you just click this little thing.
The original Darius is an ultra-wide game. It's basically 3 4:3 monitors stuck together, and that version, as far as I'm aware, has never really been ported anywhere like a physical release like this.
Well, yeah, we got the Darius Cosmic Collection recently that has it.
I guess that's
the arcade version, and there have been releases, so we can't quite say that. But no, like I'm with you with the whole 16:9 thing, but I don't mind the 4:3. It would have been nice to have the option.
These things are more personal opinions, right? These are just bonus things that we're talking about when it comes to the system. But overall, the system has a lot of really good benefits, but there are a lot of drawbacks as well. That I was hoping they would get it 100% right. I'm such a fan of the Genesis.
Again, this conversation, to you, maybe it seems like it's really going in the negative direction, but we're just trying to point out the things that, like, as people that love the original, it irked us a little bit. And there's still a lot of, like, great things to say about the console as well. The library's pretty good. The genres, like, it's pretty full. It's missing, like, sports games, like maybe one sports game. But I wouldn't have played it. But for the people that do, like, there's some great NHL hockey games on the Genesis. But the library's pretty good.
It is overall. There's a lot of good things on here. For the games that work, pick it up to get those games.
And that's the bulk of them.
Yeah,
keep that in mind, please.
I would have loved to have seen, like, okay, racing games are not something the Genesis is exactly known for. Okay, there are a couple out there. But Road Rash 2 is a weird one for me because Road Rash 2 isn't an awful game, but it definitely isn't the best racing game on the system. And for all the games that Sega could have got, they had to go to Electronic Arts to license that one game. Why not work internal and use virtual racing? I mean, virtual racing was I think it's the only one that uses the Sega Virtual Processor.
As far as I know, yes.
Yeah,
that would have been
a fully 3D game that would have been running on Genesis.
Interesting,
right?
It's like, the cart was weird, right? It was long. We have it here. We could emulate all the internals of that weird cart.
Yeah, but we didn't get that.
Yeah.
And look, I know a lot of people are going to have their own feelings about the 32X and the Sega CD not being included. I think I've made my opinion on that fairly evident. They're never, look, because they've done a plastic thing, because this exists now, that means they're likely never going to release an actual Sega CD standalone. We're never going to get a Sega CD Classic. We're never going to get a 32X Classic. This is the time to have done this. They put games on here that probably didn't need to be there, instead of putting these games on here. And I know you're probably thinking, well, they would have robbed the time they spent into making these games run well. Well, we didn't need that Tetris. We didn't need that Darius. We didn't need those games because they're not that important to the Sega Genesis as a whole. They're cool to be there, but the 32X games and Sega CD games that are important deserve to be on here as well.
I think Tetris should be on there.
Really? Okay, yes. Maybe.
I think Super Fantasy Zone should be on there. We never got that release here in North America. There's a lot of things. Again, we have two varying opinions, and I very much side with you quite a bit. But I think as a time capsule for those things, I think it's still important.
It doesn't erase
Eternal Champions.
That was a weird one.
Scoot.
That's a weird one.
Scoot off.
I don't know why it's there. Look, the Sega Genesis Mini is neat. There's a couple of games on there that are really fun to play. And if you're a fan of Sega, you got to pick this thing up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, great. If you're a fan of the Sega Genesis, if you grew up with it, even if you do notice shimmering and stuff, I do. Yeah. But I still picked it up because I think it's a compelling device. There are problems.
Yes. For a lot of people out there, you're probably going to be able to get the Sega Genesis collection on the Switch or whatever, and that's just a great... There's lots of options, lots of settings.
Not the same library, though.
Not the same library. They're not all the same games, but there are some games on there that you won't find on others, so just keep that in mind. There are various options to play. This isn't like Nintendo, who's super exclusive with their games. It doesn't release it anywhere. Sega has ported their games to several other platforms in several different ways, so there's a variety of options on here. This is specifically for people that want that classic feel, that classic look, and have it work on your modern HD TV. And if that's what you're going for, you're probably going to have a good time.
Very well said. Okay, so what do you guys think? Have you picked up one of these guys? If you did, maybe you've had your own experiences with it. Did you love it? Do you find those little things to be nitpicky? Are they glaring flaws? What do you think? Let us know in the comments.